I've been using the LUMIX S9 for over 4,000 hours, and in this video I'm going to go through everything I love and everything I hate about this little camera. Chapter 1, who is this camera for? When this camera first came out, there was a lot of controversy around it because it lacked certain features that people were expecting from a full-frame modern mirrorless camera. Now, there have been tons of videos going over this subject and why people were wrong or right or whatever. Now, given that this is a review of this camera, I'm not going to focus too much on the drama of what happened with this camera when it launched. I've made a video already about that, so you can watch that at the end of this video. Now, in the meantime, let's focus on what this camera does and who it's for. As you'd expect from a modern mirrorless camera, this thing can shoot 4K. No problem. It can shoot 4K up to 60 frames per second. It does this with a crop though, but for the price range of this thing, I think that's still pretty good. But one great thing about this camera is it shoots 6K open gate, just like the LUMIX S5 Mark II. In fact, it does a lot of things like the LUMIX S5 Mark II because it's almost the exact same camera, but at the very least, it is the exact same sensor sitting in this little body. That means we can shoot 6K OpenGate 420 in a MOV file, if I'm not mistaken, and that is incredible, again, in such a small camera body. But here's where LUMIX have differentiated this camera from the S5 Mark II. This camera is clearly marketed at content creators and, social media people who they need to put out content really fast. They're doing stuff for portrait as well as landscape. People like me, maybe people like you. And they have made a new codec for those people, and it's called MP4 Lite. What it does is it uses the open gate capabilities that this camera has. It records in 3.8K, so not quite 4K, but you could call it 4K and not be totally wrong. And it then also shoots in a much lower bit rate to then allow you to do some pretty awesome things like transfer the footage straight to your phone, and the same for photos as well, by the way. Now, this leads me into a whole other aspect of what's amazing about the S9 that LUMIX made a big deal about, and thankfully they executed very well on it. But I'll touch on that later on in the video. The next big deal with the LUMIX S9 is the new LUT system. Now, there is a nice and shiny LUT button on the back here. LUMIX drastically improved the LUT system, and now you can just simply go ahead, press a button, and choose from up to 50 different LUTs that you can upload to your camera. And you can use these LUTs for video and photo. Now, you may be asking, hold on, adding LUTs to a camera is cool and all, but I've never really done it. I don't really care. I just want to color grade. I hear you, because I was in the same boat. I thought that's a cool feature to have in cameras, like, Sony and LUMIX and Canon, I guess, have been doing this for years with other cameras. Like, there's always been a way to upload a LUT to your camera and then burn it into your footage. It's not too big a deal. Why is it a big deal with the S9? The reason it's a big deal with the S9 is because of that MP4 Lite codec. Because it takes out a big step such as color correction and color grading, you reduce the amount of time it takes to create content. So content creators who need to put videos out every single day or multiple times a week, this saves so much time. And it's actually a huge reason I've been using this camera a lot more than my S5 Mark II, which I am shooting on right now, ironically, but I have to show the S9 in this video, don't I? Now, for my photographers out there, I bet you can see how this would save you a lot of time. If you're doing anything that requires you to export thousands of images like weddings or event work, being able to just have the look you want baked into every single image, rather than delivering something that just looks like plain, I suppose, that would be such a cool way to know that you're delivering higher quality, better looking photos every single time, and there's no extra work involved because it's all done in camera. The last thing that plays a huge role into this being obviously for content creators is it's tiny. I mean, come on, it's really small. Like, do you guys remember when Peter McKinnon used to vlog with a 1DX Mark II and like the big Video Mic Pro microphone from Rode, and then the big Joby GorillaPod? Hilarious. I mean, it worked, he got the quality, but like, hilarious. But for context, this is an iPhone 14 Pro Max, and this is in a cage, by the way, and this is smaller. So, pretty good size. I wouldn't call it pocketable by any means, but it's definitely travel friendly, bag friendly. The smaller size does of course come with some drawbacks, but I'm getting ahead of myself here. So, I'm sure you can see a few, but we'll get there. Chapter 2. How I use the camera. As an aspiring full-time content creator, I very quickly saw the appeal of the LUMIX S9. And as I said earlier, I've been picking up the S9 a lot more than I have my S5 Mark II this past year. That's not to say I don't use my S5 Mark II, I'm just saying how my S9 is sometimes more convenient. A side reason I really wanted to get this camera was it's maybe stupid to some of you and you will think it's like, who cares, but I like that it comes in colors. Red is one of my favorite colors and I really love that they made it like a crimson red. That's just sick. They also have it in blue. They now have it in white, which is so cool, but I'm happy with my choice. I'm not gonna pick up a second one just to have it in white. The actually more important reasons why I picked up the S9 is because of its capabilities. Like I said before, it has the same sensor as the S5 Mark II and it has the same capabilities plus the additional ones I've already mentioned. So being able to shoot in 10-bit in 4K or up to 180 frames per second in 1080p is super useful when it comes to me creating these B-roll sequences for YouTube or just having fun with friends and capturing something interesting. It still has face detect autofocus, so the same great autofocus system that the S5 Mark II has, we have the same thing in the S9. It even has train, car, and bike detection in AF settings, and of course it has animal eye and human face and eye detection as well. The other thing that drew me into getting this camera and how it would fit really well in my workflow is actually the new LUT system. I film these talking heads almost exactly the same every single time I film a video, and at least until I move apartment, this is unlikely to change. So this is a perfect situation to burn in my LUTs. My next reason for why I wanted to pick this up was also something I've already mentioned, its size, and I'll just go over this very quickly. Something being bigger and more cumbersome to use can often reduce how often you want to bring it out of your camera bag, and as bad as that sounds, and perhaps it's not true for everybody, it's kind of true for me. This being so small means there's no excuse for me to not bring it with me. I have a smaller camera bag sling that I can just throw over my shoulder and go out and shoot with. And this camera fits perfectly into it, even with my Samyang 35-150 on it. But with the smaller f1.8 primes that I have from LUMIX, it's easy to bring this camera with me anywhere, which means I create more with it. The other side with having a smaller camera setup is that when you're vlogging, it's less noticeable, a bit less embarrassing. I don't care as much anymore, but for some people who are just getting into content creation and want to go outside and vlog, having a smaller camera and getting a small mic and a small little tripod or even just holding the camera itself will be much more comfortable than having a larger camera with a larger lens, larger microphone, etc. So far, it seems like this thing fits perfectly into my workflow because it keeps all the possibilities open because of its capabilities, which are so similar to the S5 Mark II. All this talk of color grading and color correction, have you guys ever thought about actually trying out LUTs for yourself from other creators? Well, I actually have some that you guys can try out. I have a free sample pack that you can try just by joining my mailing list, first link below that like button, and I even have some packs you can purchase from my website in the links below as well that are emulations of Kodak and Fujifilm film stock. I worked really hard on these, spent quite a lot of time just to get them right, and I'm even going to be releasing power grades of these soon for DaVinci Resolve users. Check them out in the description below and use code LUMIX S9 to get 10% off your order. Chapter 3. Should you get this? The biggest difference I've found between who should and who shouldn't get this camera is by what you define yourself as. Are you an aspiring professional filmmaker or are you an aspiring content creator? Because there is actually a difference between the two. A professional filmmaker shoots a variety of projects for other clients. This means you'll need gear that's flexible and robust. It can shoot for a long time, gives you the best picture quality possible so you can deliver the best quality possible for your clients. A content creator, however, well, the idea is you're creating content for your audience, for you guys. This can be for TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, if you still use that. Additionally, you'll be posting pretty frequently. Speed and quality become of equal importance. Now, this isn't to say that a professional filmmaker can't be a content creator or that a content creator can't be a professional filmmaker. You can, but you do need to think about where your priorities lie. Years ago, when I used to run my own production company, I used a Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 4K because it could shoot RAW and ProRes. It gave me the quality that I saw after, but when I used it for content creation, for YouTube, it was annoying. There was no autofocus, the files were enormous, and the camera took more setup than simply flicking it on and hitting record. It just presented more barriers for content creation than I wanted. When it comes to content creation, you need to have as few roadblocks as possible because the more things that get in your way of creating content, the less likely you are to actually follow through and create that content. I'm speaking from experience here. Now that we've covered all of that, can you actually use the S9 for professional work? Actually, I think you can. When this camera first came out, there were more limits on it than there are now after a couple of software updates, and thankfully Lumix listened to the community and made one of the biggest changes that I think makes this camera a no-brainer purchase. Earlier I said how to make this camera smaller, there obviously had to be some trade-offs, and a few are obvious and a few are not so obvious. The first thing is there's no EVF. Is this a big deal to me? No. If you're a photographer though, perhaps it is. There's no headphone jack on the side of the camera. There's only a mic input, which means you can't monitor your audio with headphones. There's no hot shoe on this camera. There's only a cold shoe mount, which means no digital interface for accessories and other things. This camera does have USB-C for charging and file transfer, which is great and speedy, but it does only have a micro HDMI slot, which means that you can't use a full-size HDMI and obviously no SDI. And the last thing of note here is there's only one SD card slot instead of two, and the placement has gone back to being next to the battery rather than in the side of the camera. This can mean it's a little bit tricky to get to sometimes if you have it mounted on a tripod with like a thick base plate, but otherwise, yeah, it's in the bottom of the camera now. The record limits that were imposed when this thing was first released were because there's no internal fan. And it was interesting because people actually did tests with these record limits in place and just continuously recorded every time that the record limit would be reached. And they found that this camera would last way longer than the record limits were imposing. So eventually Lumix released an update that let people turn off the record limits and made it up to us if we want our cameras to get all hot and toasty. And honestly, I have not had an issue once. So now that we've gone through what's missing, could you actually use the S9 on a professional level? I think you can, but only up until a certain level. This camera is extremely capable and there's nothing wrong with it, but once you get to a certain level of client where you need things like a backup of what you're shooting on a second SD card or a mechanical shutter to avoid any sort of flickering from low light photography or just to help with the rolling shutter, or, and it's bad to say it here, but it is kind of true, when the optics of what you're using begin to matter to your client. By this, I mean having a bigger setup with more accessories and things on it, even if having that bigger rig doesn't actually improve the quality all that much. That said, if your professional client work is things like podcasts, interviews, smaller budget commercials, social media type stuff, it can handle all those things no problem. Until the time comes where you need those more robust features that I've mentioned, I think you can get away with using the S9 for a long time. One of the features your social media type clients might actually appreciate a lot because of the S9 is the MP4 Lite codec. Being able to transfer the footage straight from camera to phone using the Lumix Lab app has actually come in handy for me, and honestly, I thought it was a gimmick at first. If you're creating reels for Instagram and TikToks as well, being able to shoot an MP4 Lite and transfer it straight to the client's phone means all they have to do is make small cuts and then boom, you've got a reel made just like that. And you don't have to do any transfer from camera to laptop, back it up on a hard drive as well, edit in whatever you're using, and then send it to them. You skipped all of that and just sent it straight to them. Very useful. And I actually put this to the test myself by editing an entire YouTube video on my iPhone, and it was a huge pain in the ass just because of CapCut, not because of the S9. The S9 was the thing that actually made it at all possible and was the easiest part of the entire process. It of course also comes in handy in places where you'd have to shoot once for landscape and once for portrait if you want to do something for YouTube or websites and then do something for social media stuff as well. Being able to shoot in open gate in 3.8K MP4 Lite means you can just do it all in one go, and because you have enough height in your shot because you're filming in open gate, you can do a crop for portrait and it still looks great. Chapter 4, rounding up the S9. This camera is awesome. If I could give it a score, for me, it would be a 9 out of 10. If you're wanting a full frame camera that's really small but still delivers on all the areas that matter, the LUMIX S9 is one of my favorite cameras to date. It makes me excited to see what Lumix will do in the future. Maybe with the S9 Mark II, they'll bring back some of the things that people were upset about and just improve on this tiny little beast of a camera. It's small, shoots great footage, and is easy to use. If you're wanting to create, this is the camera for you. I'll be making a lot more videos about the S9 soon on my YouTube channel, so make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on it when I post it. But in the meantime, if you want to see that video I made on my iPhone using only the S9, check out this video over here.